website that you go to, then you have to log in. Once you when you log in, you actually go and put your NRDS number. And this is a great site. There's a lot of different things on it. There's member benefits. There's all kinds of different things once you sign in, which I'm obviously already signed in, but that's where you go to log in, NRDS number and your password. If you don't know your password, you can get it reset. But there's a ton of stuff that's on here. They have articles that you can share with your clients. They've got, a seller's guide under resources and stuff, buyers and sellers, guide to selling, prepare to sell for buyers, guide to buy. So you got all these different resources at your fingertips that you could use for when maybe the first time you go on a buying appointment, or if you're doing a pre-listing appointment, if you don't already have something set up for yourself. So they're under here. First-time home buyers, things like that. So you can really explore on this. They also have member benefits. Let me see that. Well, how defining different things, the legal hotline, a lot of the things that have come in on the hotline. So a lot of the answers that you have, or questions that you have rather, can be found over in Legal Corner over here. Over here, though, with standard forms, when you go to standard forms, you have virtually every form that PAR has in their library. And the cool thing about it is every form, which let me just look at, we'll look at the updates and I'll show you an example of that. So when I click there, it tells you these are all the forms that were updated in that last July update. Looks a little overwhelming, like, oh my gosh. But when you realize that, unless you're selling a commercial real estate, it's not going to matter. Manufactured home, new construction, standard, that's the one that we use, vacant land, all those different things. And the only differences that those have are the same ones that are going to be on the standard agreement of sale that we're going to go over today. And it will, they just flow through, and it's like formatting it, as opposed to, any changes whatsoever. So they'll all these will follow the same. We have the appraisal contingency, broker's request for affirmation. Here's another commercial lease thing, the multiple offer summary worksheet. So a lot of these, half of these are going to be, and the listing contracts, but half of these are going to be ones that you probably won't use that often. If you guys have any questions as we're going through, just unmute, stop me, and we'll go through that. But when you're in...
When we go into .loop, on my .loop, but down at the very bottom on the left, it says PAR documents.
Yes.
Where I pull my documents.
That's correct. That's the whole library as well. PAR Interactive Docs is already in .loop.
Okay, so we don't have to go to this site.
No, you don't, but you're going to want to. You're going to want to after I show you what I'm talking about. So let's take the agreement of sale. Every document that's in the PAR library, and this is what .loop does not have, has you can download the freshest one, or they have this, which is magic, especially for new agents, which I know you guys aren't. So are you seeing this standard agreement of sale?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the guidelines for preparation of use. Every single document that's in the PAR library has this. And what it tells you is, it gives you table of contents and everything. And considering that the agreement of sale is the single most important tool that we have, and that differentiates realtors and their skill sets and how they protect their clients, and doing the best job for them, knowing how to, protect their deposits, knowing what the sellers can and can't do. This is a great companion piece that goes through, and it mirrors the different paragraphs. So you can go to a paragraph and look right here. And the beauty of it is it gives you practice tips too. Like for instance, special note the broker for sale parties. Practice tip: if the buyer's a veteran, make sure the name on the agreement matches the name on the discharge eligibility. Practice tip: don't use terms such as all registered owners or owners in title. I get questions like that quite often as to what do I put down when it's in the state, or what do I put down if there's, tenants in common and things like that. but it goes through every single part of it and, describes what like a broker dual agency versus an agent dual agency and that kind of stuff. Now we all know that, but here's a little flow chart. So, if you wanted to, you could actually screenshot that, cut it out, and show somebody like the flow. I don't know if you would want to, but if they're confused about that, and then it gives you how to fill it out, and then tips and everything. So I promise you beyond a shadow of a doubt that if you take an agreement of sale and you take this form here and you go through it and actually read it, I would bet that there are a high percentage of agents that have never actually read the agreement of sale, word for word. But this is one that you can. And if you're going to spend time on anything to enhance your negotiation skills and your representation skills and everything, this would be it. So I would recommend you just print it out, and then when you have time, if you're on a beach or something, you'll read over it. And if you don't find something in here that you didn't know, please call me. Please call me, because I would venture to say. So again, these are all under the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors standard agreements of sale. But this right here is worth the price of admission. And this is really what differentiates good agents from those that are not good agents. And we might even talk about some of that today as we go through. So any questions about that? That's where you find it and the value of it. Okay. And we talked about setting your templates up. Possibly if you wanted to highlight that stuff, you don't need to. That's just, I'm just beyond when it comes to the agreement of sale. So that's why I'm doing that.
So once again, my question, Scott, is, and this is great, and I will go in here and print this off and read it. But if I want to just get the updated template that they updated, can I get that through .loop?
They're already in there. Yes. So to answer your question,
now, I wrote an offer this morning, but I used Melody at some point helped me set up my templates in a sale document and in a listing, whatever. My templates are set up already.
Yes.
So I went in and just pulled that over because I didn't realize, I knew we were going over this today, but I didn't realize, I wasn't thinking about it. So the agreement of sale that I sent to that other agent this morning was from my original template.
But your template should have been updated as well. You would want to double check, but your template should be updated. So I bet you that you filled out the new one, but there's so subtle differences that you probably didn't know. One of the biggest is this FHA VA block, which used to be below this right here, and the mortgage thing is gone. They shifted it around. So it's above. The FHA block is above the mortgage contingency. And a lot of people that may not even realize that.
Well, you know what? Now that you said that, when I was going through, I actually was thinking that this used to be below, and now it's up. Now that you just pointed that out, I did realize that, because I thought the mortgage contingency always came first, and then the FHA stuff was second. So it did automatically update.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest visual. But again, in this case, it's updated, but there was nothing changed. It was just they moved stuff around where they felt. And this, I'm on the professional standards committee, but I also was at the spring meetings where they were discussing this, and it was hotly contended. Some people felt that they didn't get enough input from the field. Hank Lerner was involved, and then they do have a standards form committee, which I've tried to get on, and it's just people don't leave it. But they made some decisions that they didn't really vet through the general public, or reaching out to realtors. They said they reached out to a couple of brokers, but depending on who you ask, you're going to get a different answer. There was one thing that was hotly contended about the deposit, and just like the wording of it and everything, and they just felt that it was going to cause more problems. So it's not. it's not going to satisfy everybody anytime. It's like any other legal document. It'll be good as far as coverage, but it just won't be, maybe everybody's favorite. So let's dig right in. Did that answer your question, Kim?
Yes, and
okay.
So I'm thinking our stuff is updated.
Okay.
Hey, Kim, we experienced an update in 2022, so you just didn't even know it, but it did update automatically because I asked Melody about that, and she said it'll always update with the most current documents. So you can feel good that your offer went in.
Absolutely. Fine. Yeah. In the past, you used to have to go in and clean up your own templates and stuff like that, but now I think .loop, is ahead of the curve. This one kind of came quickly, but at the same time, it wasn't there wasn't a lot of discussion because there wasn't super major stuff. So we'll get right into it. And basically, like I said, they moved some stuff around, and the purpose of this whole update was for clarification. So nothing changed on the first page. Nothing changed on the second page. The first change you have is buyer finance. And in this market, with the issues that we have with people that are, as competitive as it is, I think they really tried to clean this part of it up. And the first thing is, buyer may elect to make this agreement contingent upon mortgage financing, regardless of any contingencies in this agreement. If the buyer chooses to obtain mortgage financing, the following terms apply. The reason they put that in there was if somebody was waiving the mortgage contingency, but they were getting a mortgage, then the mortgage contingency would apply to them, whether it was checked or not. And not the contingency part of it, but, like all the different time frames and everything else. And I know that sounds a little weird, so let me just say it again. They were saying that if somebody does get a mortgage, even if they don't elect it, that the terms within this paragraph apply to the other loan, or to the loan, as if it were contingent on the financing. So just because it's not contingent on the financing or somebody waived it, everything here still applies the same way. So they can't lie. They have to go within 7 days to make the application. They can't lie, on it. They have to lock their rate and all that other stuff.
So what's the point of waiving the mortgage contingency if this is going to apply anyway?
Because it won't allow you. Okay, so it's still the same purpose. So basically you're saying, hey, I don't need that. So it's just like waiving it. But what they're saying is they're putting some rules, or they're making it clear that the rules for getting that mortgage are still the same. So they have to proceed in this timely fashion in this way. That's all.
Okay, thanks.
And Scott, one of the things that I had heard too was that it also prevents, also can give indication to the seller that these people are not going to go out and buy a car so they don't qualify.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Right. So all the terms in here, if they because there is a paragraph or there is a statement saying that incurring debt or anything that creates the problem is not. So essentially they're waiving it, but it still holds them to following through. I'm trying to think of a good analogy. It would be.
So if somebody wanted to blow their mortgage to get out of the deal, and they wanted a way to walk, all they'd have to do is go out and go buy a car to blow their debt to income ratio, and then they wouldn't get the mortgage, so they could get their deposit back. This is saying You can't do that.
Well, but there's the separate thing is that they waived it. So they said it wasn't contingent on that, and if they can't get the closing, they risk their deposit anyhow.
Okay.
So if they blew that, then it wouldn't really have an impact anyhow, because since they waived it, it'd be like testing the water when they didn't ask for a water test or something, and they go out to a hose or something. I don't know. Just don't have a good analogy for it, but
okay.
So anyhow, it says seller will provide access to insurers, representatives, and as may be required by the mortgage lenders, to surveyors, municipal officers, appraisers, and inspectors. So for instance, I have a 203K loan going for one of my buyers, And I had to have contractors out there a couple of different times, and, in addition to the inspector, just all that stuff. So this is what kind of says that they're acknowledging that they'll let anybody in that's instrumental to the deal. So it doesn't, eat up the 2 walkthroughs or anything like that. I've already been out 3 times. So. And again, this is just clarifying it. It's not changing or doing anything different. It's just trying to, in some cases, make it more understandable. But I think that was difficult for them to do, and I'm not sure that it completely, did it. So if buyer fails to respond within time stated above or fails, so that was just adding a word. Going down to the mortgage contingency, that's the other change is there's not contingent on mortgage financing. Buyer and seller understand that the waiver of this contingency does not restrict the buyer's right to obtain mortgage financing for the property. So it's just trying to put things more front and center, which is why they moved the FHA VA block. They just felt that it was better to have that before you even got into the mortgage contingency. They didn't like it underneath it. I don't know why. Under elected, they just added demonstrating the mortgage lender's approval, which is a benign, just a verbiage issue. According to the following terms instead of according to the terms. And then they put the commitment date. This is one of the ones that you'll see because you'll drive yourself crazy looking for it. But they put the commitment date up here under elected. So they put it together with it instead of having it as usual under here. So they moved that up, cleaning up some.
So, now that you pointed that out, I didn't fill that in. So I sent the offer over without a commitment date.
All right. Well,
yeah,
I'd rather be on the buyer side than the seller side on that.
Well, I mean, she didn't present yet, so I may have to call her and tell her.
Well, you can always do a change in terms of agreement of sale too.
Yeah,
I mean, lock it down instead of muddying the waters and stuff.
Yeah.
By the way, the one thing that I think they tried to get across for this section is that, I mean, from an overview, there are very few ways that a seller can terminate an agreement of sale. There are very few ways that a buyer can. One of the ways that they can is the inspection contingency and the mortgage contingency. So if they can't get the loan, however, they cannot terminate based on the mortgage contingency. So what I mean by that is that there's no mechanism in the agreement of sale that says that the buyer can terminate because of the mortgage contingency paragraph and get their money back. There's nothing in there. So what a lot of people think, and falsely, that if you put in here that it can't exceed 95% for 5% conventional, or FHA, it can't do that, or the interest rate goes up or whatever, the buyer can't terminate that. They have to make a good faith effort to continue to do the things necessary to keep that loan within these parameters. If you talk to a lot of, especially old school realtors, and they say, they want to get out of it, or interest rates went up, or something, or the house didn't appraise. That's the most common one. You'll hear some realtors say, oh, well, all you have to do is get a denial letter from the lender that it won't work and terminate. Well, you can get a denial letter from the lender, but there's two things. You cannot terminate because there's no mechanism in here where it says you can. And I talked to Hank Lerner about this, and he calls it the index finger factor, where if you think you can terminate because something was different or the house didn't appraise, take your index finger and point to where in the contract it says that the buyer can terminate. And there is no place. If
you have an addendum that says a mortgage, an appraisal contingency.
Yes.
So that's what I heard loud and clear from you the last time you spoke about it, is that you're crazy if you don't do a mortgage contingency if really the buyers are at their limit and they can't go any higher. They don't have any more money to throw at it.
Right.
So that's what I heard. So the last offer that I made, I did make an appraisal contingency.
Yep. Well, so what happened was people were in a hyper competitive market and they didn't want to put anything down that would, deter the seller from accepting their offer. So they were just not including an inspection contingency, but they weren't outlining if they were going to make up what happens if the different. So on the seller side, we want to ask those questions and say, well, what happens if the house doesn't appraise? What are your buyers going to do? Oh, well, they'll make up the difference, then put it in writing. Or, well, they don't have any money to do that. Now, maybe you would have taken a different offer if you knew that and you felt that the house wasn't going to appraise. But you're absolutely right, Ruth. That's the whole thing, is that when I started, and thank goodness I had a really good manager when I started, she said, if you're writing a contract and it's not FHA or VA, put in an appraisal contingency.
That's what I was always taught.
Yeah.
And the other thing,
deal with these other agents that think it's built into the. I mean, I've dealt with this twice now.
I asked somebody that's been in the business very, very long. I say, what happens if, if the appraisal comes in low? What do you do? And there's no inspection contingency. Oh, well, you just get the lender won't give them the money and you just get a denial and you get your money back. And that was driving me crazy. And so I talked to as many people as I could, managers and everybody else about it. And half of them were still under the impression that you did that. And I called Hank Lerner and he was like, no, you can't. And so it's almost like I'm trying to spread the word, that the truth is out.
I don't understand how you can be a broker and be teaching all your people that, and I dealt with this with a Lancaster agent, and her entire office believes that you don't have to use mortgage contingent or not appraisal contingencies, because if it doesn't appraise and they can't get their loan because they have no extra money, then they automatically can terminate.
Yeah, get a denial
letter. The whole office believes that.
So here's the thing. So what do you do if that happens? If you have a buyer that, it doesn't appraise and the buyer's like, I can't do it. Well, the seller can terminate. And that's the whole thing. You don't want to terminate because you could open yourself up to future liability. It's more than just the deposit. Like if the seller terminates and doesn't have the right to within the contract, that buyer can sue them for specific performance to sell it anyhow, or put a lis pendens on it, which will tie that property up for a year, could be years. So it's a big deal. But if you're on the seller side, the only way a seller can terminate in that situation where the buyer can't do it because the house didn't appraise is to wait. You can wait for the commitment date. And you won't get the commitment, obviously, so the seller can terminate after that. And by the way, the deposit does go back to the buyer. So the commitment, and is Sharon Embelson on this call? Anybody? No? All right, I have to call her. We were discussing it, and I'm not sure that I expressed that correctly. So it does say that if the seller terminates, then buyer can gets their money back. All deposits. If this agreement is terminated pursuant to paragraph 8F2 or the mortgage loan is not obtained for settlement, all deposit monies will be returned to the buyer. So you can't just wait till the commitment date terminate and expect to keep their deposit. But you can get the house back on the market at that time. The other option to do is when you're notified that they can't get the loan, if you're a seller's agent, you can say, all right, well, let's just sign a release and get your money back to you. Not terminate, but just sign a release. And that effectively releases both parties from the deal. The buyer, if something like that happened, or if their loan was out of whack, are required to do everything that they possibly can in order to satisfy this portion of it. So they just can't give up. They have to try. And if they do terminate, they added this part down here, which says termination of this agreement. by buyer due to the mortgage lender's denial of buyer's mortgage application may demonstrate bad faith by buyer and result in a forfeiture of deposit monies to seller. And what that means is that they're required to try to make the loan work. What would that be? I don't know, maybe gift money or whatever the case may be. But they can't just give up. They have to continue to do that. Now, and I'm not telling you guys to do this, but if you, as a seller, did not terminate that, and the buyer obviously doesn't have the ability to terminate, and they can't get the loan, possibly could you ride it out to settlement, and the day after settlement, try to keep the buyer's money? I just don't think that's right, though. But, you know, legally in this contract, that's something that potentially could happen, but I would not recommend it. We're not here to try to, you know, get your seller $7,000 or $5,000. You know what I mean? So,
see if I'm having fun.
Let's see if Bob says anything that'll be insulting to us. I'm kidding.
No.
Joker, can you mute Bob? Please? Thank you. All right, guys. Sorry about that. So anyhow, are there any questions about what we just went over? Okay.
I just wanted to reinforce something, Scott, because I had a deal. I just had a deal that closed, and because I listen to what you say, even though I might not say much about it, but anyways, you had one time mentioned that you really needed to write out in writing that if you were going to cover that gap. So I had somebody that said to me, hey, I said, well, what if it doesn't appraise? You know, I was comfortable at a certain number, but they went above it. And he was like, we want that house. We want that house. And I said, but what if it doesn't appraise? And he said, oh, they'll come up with it. I said, could you put that in writing? Just put that in writing. And we're okay. And they did pay $8,000 over appraised price. Like that's what I wasn't seeking that. It was just that the client that I was dealing with had mental health issues, and going to talk with her about not getting the number that she was expecting would have been really traumatic for her. And I explained that to him. I said, I can't tell her, you know, you come up with a number that you'll match and she'll be happy. And if we don't need to use it, your guy will be happy. So that's fine. So that's what they did. And then we ended up using, it was an $8,000 difference, but they were willing to go $20,000. So they were happy too. So I'm just reinforcing the fact that, you know, if you don't ask, the answer is always going to be no. And when you get at the settlement table, they're going to say no too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and in that case, did you make them prove that they had the assets to be able to do that the funds were there?
Well, actually, I didn't. And that's a great thing that you said that, because that was my next thought, because then they ended up having another co-signer on the loan that assured that factor. But that came afterwards. So I wish I had asked for that, but I didn't. But just lucky for the situation that they had a co-signer that would, you know, bump up their, I think it was a loan ratio value.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. I was just wondering because I have somebody right now that I'm dealing with, and he wants to lowball an offer on a house that just came back on the market, but yet he's putting $200,000 into this transaction. And I'm like, but you know how that's going to look to the seller. You know, you've got all this cash and you want to lowball their offer. If you've got all that money, why can't you pay their price? That's what they're going to come back with. So, you know, it's like, well, how much do you show them in the bank account to know that they're secure, to not hinder, you know, if you're the buyer agent?
I had a client move money around it within her accounts so that it only showed the amount that she was offering.
Well, that's smart.
That was just a suggestion. She had like a savings account, and she had, you know, so she moved from her checking account to her savings account the exact amount that she was offering, and then then she moved into another like money market account, and then it showed in her checking that she had enough for her closing. So she only showed 2 of her accounts, and that protected them from disclosing that she had like another 200,000.
Right. Okay. I was just curious about that.
Well, Jonathan in the chat had asked a question about like if the buyer can't terminate based on the mortgage contingency and they can't get the loan, what's it good for? And if you can't get the loan, you can't get the loan, and that's fine. But they just are required to make a good faith effort. The difference is that they can't terminate it prematurely. So once you get the commitment date, if you can't demonstrate that you can get that, that's when, you need to let the seller know, hey, or actually ahead of time. I mean, if you know that your buyer is not going to be able to get that, and you're the buyer agent, call the seller's agent and just say, hey, look, they just found out that they had some kind of lien, something or a judgment in their background that's not going to allow them to do that, and try to work it out. So there's not a one size fits all for the agreement of sale, but that basically this is to not only allow the people for not getting penalized if they can't get the loan, but it's also to hold them accountable to make a good faith effort to do everything they can and not just change their mind. So kind of works for both buyer and seller in that situation.
I've had lenders that refuse to send me a commitment letter.
Really?
Yep. And they because there were contingencies, and I said, we'll send them the commitment letter and list the contingencies. We don't care. We just want to know that you're supporting them in the event that they can knock out XYZ, and that the buyer, that makes the sellers feel confident that this thing is going to go through. But I have had mortgage companies refuse to send me.
Well, I had a conversation with somebody yesterday where they were talking about how the appraisal's not in yet, but their commitment date's there. And the fact is that, you could get the lender to issue a commitment, and it's just going to say one of the conditions would be based on a satisfactory appraisal. So you can, but that's a real big thing. I had an agent whose son, he was helping his son buy a house, and the commitment date came, and the day after, the seller terminated, and his son was so mad at him because he didn't stay on top of the commitment date. So that's always kind of ringing in the back of my mind, how, he blew it and possibly, the relationship with a family member. But anyhow, all right. So if there's no other questions, we can just kind of plug ahead, and it's good conversation though. So that's more or less the changes in the agreement of sale. So as you can see, with notwithstanding the conversations that we had, most of the stuff was just to try to clarify. So there are no others. On some of these other things, you'll see like the numbers and the margins will be red. Well, that just means they changed like the order or something in there. So they're doing that. So here's the price escalation addendum to the agreement of sale, right?
I have a question.
Oh, yeah, sure, Marie.
You said something about page 13 on the agreement of sale.
Yeah.
What did you say about that? I missed
the magic box.
I do check that. So that
26G every single time. And that's why I hard code it in my template, just so I'll know that it's always checked.
You don't forget it.
Yeah. And so those are the, setting up a template can save you a lot of time and a lot of, like agita or aggravation.
Can you explain to me exactly what checking that does mean?
So if you leave this unchecked, it says seller is limited to retaining sums paid by buyer, including the deposit monies, as liquidated damages. So what that means, if you don't check the boxes, let's say the seller goes under contract and takes a job in Phoenix and packs up their house and sells the dog, and I'm joking about that. Nobody would ever do that. But let's say they do all that, and then on the day before settlement, the buyer calls up and goes, you know what, I changed my mind, right? So if you're a buyer agent and you didn't check that box, that means that the seller can come after the buyer for everything and all expenses and everything that they've done. So checking the box limits your buyer's exposure to just the deposit money.
Gotcha.
That's why I call it the magic box, because where else can you get like a hold harmless in a way? I mean, unless they, if they default on the contract, that's one thing. If they're, maybe if they lied about something, then that might be different, where it breaks that veil. But for the most part, you check that box and the most the seller can try to get. That's why everybody's always talking about the importance of getting a significant deposit to keep people from walking away and stuff. So if you have $1,000 deposit, somebody might walk away on that. But if you have a $10,000 or $15,000 deposit, they're less likely to. And that for your buyer, what will win the contract might, put them more at risk too. So.
Well, I didn't know what liquidated damages was.
Just any miscellaneous expenses that were incurred during the term of the contract based on their commitment to purchase the house.
Okay.
So always check it. Always, always, always. So in a price escalation agreement, well, you guys know it, right? But they completely switched it around. They put 2 words in it. Equal, or 3 words, equal to or higher than the net purchase price. So I don't know why they felt they needed that. But anyhow, it just says that, if you get a competing offer that's equal to or higher than the net purchase price offered by somebody else, it triggers the clause. So there's nothing new there. The appraisal contingency, which was what I was waiting with bated breath for them to come back with some magic reconstruction of it, because everybody is so confused about it. All they did was brush it up with some verbiage. So in here, you guys know that you put the purchase price or blank amount. And one way, if you want to use this, if let's say your seller or your buyer is going to make up $10,000 and the sale, you could put in here, like drop a box in here and put sale price minus $10,000 if you're doing an escalation clause too, because you don't know what the end one's going to be, right? If you're doing that, I still recommend, like Ruth and I talked about, going back to page 14 and having them spell it out on page 14 as well. Buyer agrees to contribute up to $10,000 in the event of an appraisal shortfall or something towards purchase price in the event of a shortfall. So although they may, I don't know if they made it a little bigger or not, probably not, but you can always do that. Now, the problem is on the other side, the seller agent side, are they going to see that? Are they going to know what it means? Are they going to? So I feel like it has to be a little more in their face, which is why I recommend you can do that here, but also do it on the contract itself and highlight it.
Scott, let me just, and I think I understand this, but I wrote an offer this morning and they're willing to cover up to $5,000 short on appraisal. So in the box up under number 1, I took the offer price and subtracted 5,000, and that's the number I put in there. That has
Perfect.
To at least hit that. And then I had them initial option number 2.
Okay.
Because it says if the minimum appraisal value is met or if the appraisal is not completed, then it goes into that they have to provide additional funds at settlement, which is what they're doing. They're making up the difference.
Are they? But they're only up to $5,000.
Yeah.
So you have a little bit of a conflict in there, in the sense that the best way to think of this is option 1 is like it's always been, and you put in that right there to show that you cover 5,000. Option 1 is if it doesn't appraise, we either terminate the agreement of sale or negotiate it out. Right.
If you have an escalation clause.
Well, before we get into that, but you're right, Marie. So in paragraph 1, it's the same old appraisal contingency.
Right.
We don't have to buy it. We can negotiate or whatever.
Yeah.
Option 2 is we're going to buy it and we're going to do whatever's necessary to cover that difference. Now, you already have put in there that it only has to appraise at a certain amount, but this still says that you're going to pretty much do what it takes to buy the house by providing additional funds, adjusting the loan amount, adjusting the loan to value, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So you probably would want to, have in the future, have this checked off on 1.
So
And-
option 2 is just saying we're buying the house no matter what. It doesn't have to appraise.
Yes,
Then why do you even use an appraisal contingency?
because you can set the terms of what the appraisal contingency is. So if you did option 1 and said, hey, we're buying it at 5,000, we're willing to contribute 5,000. So we offered you 300. It only has to come out to 295. If it comes out, if it doesn't come out to 295, then we don't have to buy the house.
Right. But what I'm saying is, why would there even be an option 2? Option 2 is saying we're going to buy it no matter what it appraises at. So why would you even send an appraisal contingency? Because you're not basing buying the house on what it appraises. You're going to make
because you're basically stating that you're going to make up the difference if it does not appraise, and you're kind of putting it in writing, saying we're going to make up the difference. So I think that was because
but you could still write that at the end of the contract on page 14, and then
you could, but I think they were trying to get one document that really covered all those different factors. If you would make up the difference, if you wouldn't make up the difference, how much you want to make up. What about a straight, appraisal contingency? Because if you remember, the original appraisal contingency was just, hey, the house has to appraise. That's it. So they tried to.
So I did fill this out wrong. I should have still had them check option number 1, even if they're.
Yeah. If you're not willing to do whatever it takes to make up the difference, then it reverts back to.
Now,
it says.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in my particular situation, my people are putting $30,000 down. So if that appraisal shortfall came up even more than 5, they could decrease their down payment and still be able to follow through on buying the house.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna worry about this one here because they have the money to do what they have to do.
Okay.
But
yeah, you want to. It's kind of option 1 is we're not going to buy it unless it meets the numbers that we prescribe.
Right.
This one is I think the idea of this also was to change or to address the issue of how the appraisal affects the loan to value ratio and that other stuff on the original agreement of sale. So, that's what I think but to confuse it more, they put, if the minimum appraisal value is not met, this addendum is null and void. So this doesn't exist. You know what I mean? So it goes back to like not having an appraisal contingency, but having the loan, and you're back to just a straight contract. See what I mean?
They make all this stuff so confusing.
This is one of the most challenging, let me say, documents that I think, and this is, in my opinion, causes probably more confusion than it clears up.
Yeah, because I'm like, yeah.
How about if it's got to appraise if I buy it. If it doesn't appraise, I'm still buying it, and I'll make up the difference. I don't.
So Scott, what I understood too was that, from my understanding, that people were writing a lot in the comments of a lot of confusing information, even more confusing than that. And so I just am remembering what was said which every time that we write something on the contract, we're not lawyers. And so we put ourselves in jeopardy of making legal statements that are not approved by the lawyers that are used to consult for these documents. And that's where I got that from. The less you write, the better.
That is true. But and we can't practice law. So we can't make it conditional for the most part. You can't say, that if buyer or if seller does not, something, then there will be a 2%. But you don't want to write a lease information in there, stuff like that. But if you say something to the effect of, hey, we're going to make up the difference, that's pretty straightforward. It's a unilateral commitment. It's not an agreement between both parties. And I'm not saying you can make unilateral commitments that don't turn into legal things, but you can put, if you wrote in, seller agrees to have the swing set in the backyard removed by 5/5 or whatever. That's not stepping over that legal line. But you're right. when you get some agents that really get verbose and they try to make it sound like a legal contract, wheretofore the seller is, that kind of stuff, and throws in like legal type things that's borderline, if not over the line.
So, and I've also seen on my listings appraisal gap forms that were drawn up by other agencies to look like real formal documents, but they were definitely created by the agency, and maybe they ran it by a lawyer. I don't know.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If they did, I mean, back when I first started, a lot of people weren't even using the PAR forms. Each brokerage kind of had their own contract there for a long time. And they just had to have certain elements that you learn in school as to what creates a valid contract. But anyhow, so that's good points, Ruth. I appreciate it. Any other questions?
Just one quick thing. So
Sure.
Whenever you've got someone who's willing to make up the difference, you use option 1 and show that in that first blank. Let's say they're willing to take $10,000 out of their pocket. Then what you're going to do, if you have a $300,000 sales price, you're going to put in there $290. Correct?
That is correct. Yeah, but if it doesn't appraise at $290, it's game over unless it gives the buyer the right to terminate. But unless you negotiate it. So basically, you terminate it, negotiate it, and I guess the buyer could accept it and move forward, but they don't have to.
Okay, but this is where you put that number in there that they're willing to negotiate that.
That is correct. Yeah, up here where
Right.
this is, and like I said, if you have an escalation clause, you can put sale price minus whatever you're willing to cover. In your scenario, $10,000. So you can include that with the escalation clause, and that way you're saying that. I'm saying that there are so many realtors that don't understand this document that to do the best for your buyer, it would be that one line saying that the buyer's willing to make up $10,000 towards a purchase price should there be like an appraisal shortfall.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
But I'm saying do it at both spots. That's what I would do. Just because in that way, that's a real problem that we have out there. There's a lot of agents that are practicing that don't understand the documents, or worse yet, have been told by somebody that they work with who doesn't understand it. Instead of knowing it by themselves. That brings me back to my original statement that led off the meeting, which is this is the most important document for our buyers' protection, for our sellers' protection, for our value, and for our representation and avoiding E&O problems than anything else. So just knowing those 14 pages and the ancillary documents is going to make you such a better agent. And you'll start to notice in the field, if you haven't already, and I'm sure you have, that there are some agents out there that are just kind of winging it. Like the guy that said, oh yeah, they'll make up the difference, or they'll make up 10,000, whatever. Like Ruth said, it's like then put it in writing. So.
Well, and I think it's really important when you get an offer without an appraisal contingency to call that agent and just say exactly that, Scott.
Yeah.
If this does not appraise, are your people prepared to make up the difference? Because you did not send me an appraisal contingency, because there's all these agents out there thinking that it's just built into the mortgage, and that if they can't get the mortgage, then it automatically ends and they get their money back.
Yeah, so and there have been several instances where I've gotten phone calls of people that were like, they didn't appraise, and when they called the other agent says, well, they don't have the money to cover that.
Yeah.
But they didn't have an appraisal. And I've seen it the other way too. I took a contract where the gal that wrote it had included an appraisal contingency, but then she wrote on the agreement of sale that they're going to cover any appraisal gap. And so I text her and I'm like, so why the appraisal contingency? And she goes, you're right. So we didn't sign it. They didn't submit it. And we went off and everything was fine. So, but it cuts both ways. So just in the interest of time, I just want to go over a couple of these things. This was a pretty significant change. They took out the buyer's name from this document, the multiple offer summary worksheet. If you guys used one in the past year, you'll notice that they had the buyer agent, then they had the buyer's names and stuff. They took that out because they felt that it could create a situation where somebody wasn't choosing the best offer and they made a decision based on somebody's last name or an assumption. So to avoid any indiscretion, or not indiscretion, to avoid any prejudice or making a decision on anything but the sale price, they decided to drop the names. And then the acceptance by date. So instead of acceptance by, that would be that date that they give you that says 24, 1 day, 2 day, whatever. So that's what they did with that. I would have liked to have seen them make a bigger comment column or bigger comment thing just to write different comments for the. They also made a change to the broker's request for affirmation, the BRFA. So this is when you want to make sure that your offer was actually presented. You send it over with the offer, and it gives all the pertinent information, and the broker, acknowledges, and then here's written affirmation that the offer described was submitted to their, or the property is subject to a previously executed agreement, or the client has waived, the seller has waived in writing the right to receive future offers. So you send an offer in and they say, sorry, somebody else got it or whatever. This is their affirmation saying, we did receive your offer and this is why it wasn't presented. They also added written request now for counteroffers. So you send an offer in, and then let's say that you want to improve your offer, or I don't know, that they didn't accept, or they come back and counteroffer to you, and then you counteroffer, and you want to make sure that they do it. One scenario I could think of is if you're lowballing them or verbal, whatever, and then you go back with you improve your offer, you want to make sure that they actually got it. So.
Now,
I don't know.
I just got one of those for the
Did
first
you?
time. Well, I just got this for the first time ever since I've been selling real estate. Yesterday, I wrote an offer over the weekend. There were 12 offers, but I could have sworn, I wonder if she sent the old one. I could have sworn that the box that was checked said we rejected your offer.
They might have added something like that.
I think under written affirmation, there was something that said, that I'll have to look it up, but
maybe
she just sent this to me and it was completely filled out and I never got one of these ever.
So maybe, yeah, I know I have not seen one either. So I don't know that it's used that often, but I do get calls from people, the other broker or other agents that are, I don't think my offer was presented. And I say, well, what makes you think that? Well, I don't know. I just don't think that it, and I'm like, okay, call me back when you have proof. You know what I mean? And nobody ever calls me back.
Right. Well,
So,
what I do is that the multiple offer summary, that the one before this that you presented.
Yeah.
Okay. What I do
just write
is I make my sellers sign that, and then I just send that to them. If they ask, if they say, I want proof that my offer was presented, then I just send them the initial signed sheet of the multiple offer summary sheet. So I always get them to sign it and I keep it in my room.
I think that's a good idea, because then because if they say, oh no, I thought this other offer we accepted, because no, you told me offer one and here's your initials. So, okay, good idea. Good tip. On the listing, anybody have any questions about that other stuff?
Well, that multiple offer summary, I asked another realtor at one point when I was in a multiple offer situation to give me a copy of the spreadsheet showing what was presented, and they refused.
Well, once again, when you're representing a buyer or a seller, they can direct you to do things. Unless it's illegal or unethical, we have to do what they tell us to do. Illegal or unethical. So maybe they said, I don't want to have that sent back. maybe the agent overstepped. I mean, you know,
Do they have to prove to you what the other offers were?
No.
Technically,
They can let you know. I think it's a courtesy not to send this, because I personally feel that I wouldn't want my offer strategy shared, especially with the buyer agent name on it. Because what if I go up against those people, the other 2 people that, or 3 people that lost, then on the next one? Now all of a sudden you whip this thing out and you're like, oh, Wanda, you know what she did? That was pretty tricky.
That's true.
Yeah. So I don't personally agree with it.
That's what
I know that Gary used to say, do it every time. I don't agree with that. So I think that, you know, there may be circumstances where that would work. So.
Well,
So
Gary asked me for one once, and I just, what I have done since that all started with the multiple offers is I've redacted the name of the buyers, and the the offer that I send to prove that the escalation was done. I redact the name of the agent, the buyer, and then on the spreadsheet I only use the initials and or maybe the agency, not the name of the buyer agent, so that, and the initials of the buyer. So I don't
That's
give
a good idea.
information.
Yeah, you know, I know we're running out of time and we're 2 minutes over, but to your point, that's super interesting, because could you imagine if you had the buyer's name, which is why I'm glad they took that off too, and then you spray this thing out to everybody, the 14 offers that came in on that house, and all of a sudden the people that lost, all of a sudden they look over and they go, hey, wait a minute, I know I've been showing these people houses or whatever. I mean, it just could cause a lot of stuff. So I agree with redacting, or having to had redacted it, but now we don't have to. So
Well, the thing is too, on that form, I never put the buyer's name, even when they had buyer's name there. I never put it in. But even under where it says buyer agent, you can just put, what I usually do is I don't put the name of the buyer agent. I just put the name of the brokerage they represent.
yeah.
And then you're really not sharing any information about.
And that doesn't really matter, other than to legitimize the fact that there were other offers.
Exactly. So I just put the brokerage name and that's it. And then, you know, if for some reason I would have to cough up that offer, you know, I always have it, but.
Yeah. Good point. Good points. Okay. So the listing contract, they have an explanatory paragraphs that they've added. So it's all the same, all the same, all the same, all the same. Oh, this is what an MLS is. So they explain the MLS service. Then they explain that they have the right to decide whether their property will be marketed in an MLS. You guys probably see where this is going, right? Or opting out of it. And then broker will use or will not. And then they put another, you know, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you really sure that you don't want it advertised on the MLS? So here they tell them that, you know, it basically could inhibit the ability to sell your home. It's not going to be marketed for sale via MLS. Further, they understand that all public marketing through yard sign, social media, public facing may be prohibited, because, you know, different MLSs require, and remember, this is all for all of Pennsylvania. So there's some areas where that might be prohibited based on their MLS. And that they might be required to sign an additional waiver or release. As you guys all know, you know the MLS rules. So, and I'm setting up a guy to come in and talk to us at one of our meetings to go over like some of the changes and everything. But this is a big, you know, because of houses that are, you know, being sold off market, and everybody's, you know, all the realtors are flipping out because they've got buyers that can't find these homes, and then all of a sudden they pop up and go in the MLS as comp purposes only and all that other stuff. They want to make sure that the owners are actually understanding what's going on, where, you know, where they're not being put out to as many people as possible to benefit them. And there may be some people that don't, but then it defines a virtual office website and IDX a little bit, nothing really there. And this, they go over FIRPTA, which again is the Foreign Investment and Real Property Tax Act. And that's if somebody sells a home and they are not a U.S. citizen, they have to hold back 15%. And if a sale goes through and the seller is not a U.S. citizen and the buyer is responsible for making sure that tax gets paid, then they become on the hook for that 15%. Doesn't happen often unless, you know, you deal with, you know, places that are, you know, corporate owned or not U.S. citizen owned and stuff. Title companies should catch that, but if there's any reason that you believe that it's not, then you want to keep an eye out for that. So that's FERPTA. And that is all our stuff. So, I mean, lots of good comments and everything. I know it's a pain whenever you get new things, but they come out generally at least every 2 years, if not every year, they'll come out with updates and stuff. So they try to do it right in around this time for the summer market. Wait a minute. Let me just check the chat. I have a broker question. Can you stay on for a second? Yes, I can, Ruth.
It's not private. I mean, if you want to answer it real quick, I have a house that we put a contract on that's under contract, and I just happened to look at the listing, and it says active under contract, but they never told me that they were going to be doing active under contract.
So you wrote a contract on a house, and and they accepted it?
Yeah.
And it's active under contract.
Yeah.
So was it like that when you wrote it?
No.
Oh, okay. So what they're doing is they're saying that
they're getting backup offers.
They're getting backup offers,
yeah,
which if the seller, they're not required to from your client, but if your client tells you that they want to do that, then that's the way they're handling it.
Okay. So, but wouldn't they tell the buyer agent that, by the way, no?
Not really. I mean, it doesn't really affect it doesn't affect, it's kind of annoying, I think. But at the same time, there's nothing wrong with it. And as long as you perform on your contract, there's no way that this other contract would come into effect. So it doesn't affect you other than put the pressure on you maybe a little bit.
I definitely just sent the confirmation of the lending. So I sent that during this conversation because I was thinking, I don't remember what the date was. Maybe I should send that. So I went ahead and sent it. I just got it yesterday. But the other thing that I was curious about was I didn't go into the listing yet to see if they put in a kick out date or something like that, because that definitely isn't in writing. Because they can do that. They can kick you out. I had that happen before when the guy was taking the contingency off the sale of his house, and he was going for a jumbo loan, and we had like 1 day to go, and they kicked us out. Someone came in with a higher offer. Oh, that was painful.
Well, yeah. So like I said, if you meet all your dates and perform, on the buyer side, they can't do anything to remove you from that. Even if they have somebody in the wings that's willing to pay $100,000 more, unless they could terminate it, but then that could result in a lawsuit where they tie up their place. You know what I mean?
Or it kind of holds my buyer's feet to the fire. If it doesn't appraise, they can say they have another offer.
Yeah.
So that was the question. I just wanted to know. I always, as a courtesy, did that to let them know that we were accepting other offers, but yes, only if they backed out would they become applicable.
Right. And again, remember, one of the code of ethic rules is that you have to depict a true status and true situation with every deal. So, but I've seen some people do that, and then they remove, or a lot of times you'll see that where they're waiting for the deposit check. And I think it's more of a not going under contract and taking it back, not going from pending and back to active.
So let me ask a question. I'm kind of confused here. So if somebody accepts your offer, but then it's active under contract, and then somebody else comes along and puts in a better offer, can they automatically just tell you, we got a better offer and we're going with that one, and just terminate?
Not if you're in contract and you're abiding by and meeting all of your.
Well, then what's the purpose of continuing to? So I guess the purpose of continuing to market the property is if you have a contract with contingency, like contingency to sell your property and your property doesn't sell.
And there's specific forms for that. But that, and it also, like Ruth says, it kind of sets them up so if you get into where you have to negotiate a point that you feel the pressure of maybe they do have another contract. However, if you ask the other agent, do you have a backup contract, they must answer you, and they must answer you.
So they can't use the backup contract unless your contract falls.
No, you can take a backup contract. You can take 5 backup contracts, but you have to be very, very, very careful to make sure that they're positioned correctly. I know of an agent that wrote 2 contracts on the same house and didn't position it correctly, and there was a very high. I think the brokerage even had to make up. It was a mess. I mean,
it was the purpose of doing that, writing 2 contracts in one house.
Okay, so let's say in Ruth's scenario, she's got a contract. The other agent has Ruth's contract in hand, and Ruth still has to go through inspections and stuff, right? And she didn't say anything about that she will or won't, pay for this or that. So I get a backup offer from Mike, and it's maybe $10,000 more, and I'm sitting in there. Now Ruth comes to me and says, "Hey, it needs a new roof." What are the odds that my seller's going to go, oh, okay, we'll do that and negotiate? It just improves their negotiation position. And we do have another contract. Well, what are the terms of the contract? Well, that's confidential. But we do have another contract, so we're not going to do any of your repairs. Would you like to continue with the agreement, or wouldn't you? Well, yeah, my people want the house. So it strengthens your negotiation position and gives you a little bit of, it's not, it can kind of be kind of a real pain in the butt. But like I said, if you do that, you really, and call me before you do it, but you really have to be sure to show where that second contract is, and that they're aware that they're in a second position, and that the only way that that contract would be able to be performed on or accepted would be if the first contract, dated such and such. I mean, you have to really be detailed to make sure that it doesn't blow up in your face, because if you have 2 people that think they're both buying the house, you're gonna have a problem.
Okay, so you're saying 2 contracts from 2 different people. I thought
sure.
The same person wrote 2
contracts.
No. Okay. This kind of stuff does not happen that often, though.
It doesn't. And I've never, you generally ask the seller, hey, do you want us to continue marketing your property and trying to, achieve backup offers? Sometimes I don't even ask that because it's a good deal and everything. Not that I don't want them to know that, but a lot of people say, yeah, sure, go ahead. What the heck? And now all of a sudden we got that burden on us. Yeah. But at the same time, it basically says in the listing contract, it says, once we accept the contract, that we're not obligated to continue marketing your property. So unless they pull that out and say, hey, wait, I want you to continue. So it's almost the default that they would have to ask us.
Well, I wrote an offer on a house, and they accepted there were 2 offers, and they accepted the other offer, but the other offer had a contingency that they had to sell their house.
Sale and settlement, yeah.
So what the agent said to me is, she's like, we're going to continue to market it. We're not accepting your offer as a backup offer, but if for some reason this deal would not go through, I'll reach out to you. And then, if your people are still interested. Well, then my people called me like 3 weeks later and said, this house is back on the market. And I called that agent and said, why didn't you reach out to me? Like, this is the second time.
Forgot. He or she forgot.
She said, oh, I have to change it. It is pending again. Somebody off the street saw the for sale sign and negotiated a deal with the seller. And so it's going to go pending again.
It's a private deal. Oh, yeah, no, she was so
they did a private deal. Yeah.
Or she got both sides. But yeah. So anyhow, we can go over, there are a couple of there's 3 different contingency documents for the sale and settlement of properties. There's a time kick out. There's a regular straight one. And next time I'll go over like the difference, because there is a way that you should go through and do it, that you can try to get it accepted. So,
but shouldn't the listing agent let the person with the buyer know that it's going to stay active under contract until all contingencies are cleared? I mean, isn't there some kind of
I
courtesy?
think it's, well, like I said, a lot of people will keep it on there until, wait, Jonathan's got to head out. But Jonathan, I wanted to answer your question. Can a seller choose not to sell a house to a corporation or an iBuyer? Yes, they can. It's not a protected class, so they're not discriminating. All right? You take care. All right, guys. So I'm sorry I cut you off, Wanda. But yeah, a lot of agents just, they don't do that. They'll hold it until the deposit check comes in and then they revert it and stuff. I don't know. It's annoying, but it's not unethical or a bad practice. So
Okay. Thanks.
all right, guys. Well, I got to go. Any other last minute questions? Okay.
Nope.
Well, hopefully that cleared up. And all those, by the way, one final word. All of the documents that we went over, they flow through, like I said, to leased land and mobile homes and all kinds of stuff. So you'll see that in there with them too. They changed the blocks around and stuff, but for the most part, everything's still kind of the way it is. All right.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
You bet. You guys have a good day. Good seeing y'all.
See ya.
Bye.